It was a place of fantasy.
When you drove up there, you would come around that corner, and when you would see it, you would just be so excited because it really did look like a castle. It was just a magic place to go.
It was a place of beauty.
The whole gulch up in there was green, beautiful flowers, great buildings.
It was a place for kids.
One kid wants to go watch the zoo, another wants to go on the rides, and someone to play in the playground. There's so much to do.
It was a place for adults.
We both love to dance, and we go to every dance that we could.
It was a place for families.
And it was every bit as much fun taking my children there as it was for me when I went.
It was a place for the ages.
It was the one green place that everybody could access, that everybody could get to.
It was gone in a matter of minutes.
That fire was just a loss to everybody.
It's now a place of history and memories.
As soon as you was born as a baby, everybody talked about the Columbia Gardens. That was the place to go and do it.
It was 68 acres of heaven just east of the richest hill on earth. It was the Columbia Gardens.
Remembering the Columbia Gardens was made possible with production support from the Montana Cultural Trust, the Greater Montana Foundation, the University of Montana, and viewers like you who are friends of Montana PBS.
The Columbia Gardens was a change from everyday life in Butte, from the darkness of the mines to the green grass and trees of a canyon east of town. But mining built Butte, Montana, and mining helped build the Columbia Gardens. The prospect of mining brought William Andrews Clark to Montana in 1863. After a try at prospecting, he made his fortune selling supplies to miners, running a mail delivery service and banking. In 1872, Clark came to Butte and saw the potential for mining. By 1875, he took control of a foreclosed mine, expanded into silver, gold, and copper mining, and a copper king was born. In 1888, the year before Montana became a state, the owner of Butte's only vaudeville house leased 21 acres of land east of the city of Butte in what was originally called Horse Canyon. John A. Gordon and Frederick Ritchie wanted to build a park. The two hoped building a picnic grounds, restaurant, dance hall, beer hall, zoo, and a grandstand for horse racing, rodeos, and theater productions would attract visitors out of the city and into the gulch near the East Range. But it wasn't working.
Ritchie and Gordon did not succeed with their park because they had no good, solid transportation to the facility. So they decided that they just couldn't make it.
By 1898, Clark was one of Montana's richest people and eager to serve the citizens of Montana. But after the Montana legislature elected Clark, the United States Senate refused to seat him due to bribery allegations.
He was trying to purchase his senatorial seat, which he ultimately did get, but that was his goal. He had done everything else, I guess, he wanted to do.
And his ultimate goal was not to be a mine owner or a park baron or whatever. His ultimate goal was to be a U.S. Senator. And he achieved that, and then the Senate slapped him in the face and says, no, you bribed your way here, we will not seat you.
Back in Butte, Clark and J.R. Wharton, the president of the Butte Electric Railway Company, went for a ride in an open carriage. Legend has it that the two witnessed children playing in a dirty street. Clark reportedly was upset and told Wharton to look for a site to build a community park. Wharton found the land that would become the Columbia Gardens, but it was more than just Clark's goodwill that created the gardens.
Clark's purchase of the Columbia Gardens, he says, and he claims, was done solely to help benefit the people of Butte. I believe it was done solely to help the benefit of William Clark become a United States Senator.
Whether for personal gain or philanthropy, Clark unveiled the newly named Columbia Gardens to the public on June 4, 1899. But if the Columbia Gardens was to be a success, people would have to get there. A big problem for the original owners. A one-way streetcar built back in 1889 was never safe or reliable. For Clark, transportation was not a problem. He also owned the Butte Electric Railway Company, the trolley system that served the mining city. After spending nearly $40,000 rebuilding and expanding the line, it wasn't long before packed streetcars were heading east from the corner of Park and Main toward the Columbia Gardens.
The streetcars ran all over Butte.
And that was half the fun, was going out on the streetcar.
The streetcars run just as smoother than your buses now. No noise either, they were electric.
Fresh air, the beautiful scented fresh air while you were riding and the wind blowing through your hair.
It'd take around a good 20 minutes to half hour just to get there, yeah. And the big thing, the clangs and all that noise was, it'll always be right up here in our head. We'll never forget it.
If it was a little bit rainy, the parents wanted to take a closed car, but us kids used to fight and squall. We want to ride the open car.
The ride was terrific, but you had to go right through East Butte. And those kids were tough down there. So right away, you had to establish your pecking order if you wanted to stay on the outside seat.
The streetcars, when they'd pull up, they had a circular area where they pulled into, and they parked and they let everybody out.
J.R. Jesse Wharton was the man responsible for keeping the trains rolling. He came to Montana when he was 25 years old and worked for Clark, first in banking, then as manager of the Silver Bow Water Company, before being named head of the Butte Electric Railway Company.
William Clark purchased the Columbia Gardens, but the real father of the Columbia Gardens was Jesse Wharton.
It was all his idea, my grandfather's idea, and he did all the work on it. W.A. Clark just provided the money.
Clark said, "I'll make you manager of a place to go for these kids, and I'll give you a blank check," and he did.
Wharton was the one who decided that they needed to develop shrubbery and flowers and equipment and all sorts of various other things at the Columbia Gardens. So Jesse Wharton had a tremendous amount to do with the development of the Columbia Gardens, much more so than William Clark.
Wharton went right to work, recreating the gardens. All of the existing buildings were torn down. In their place, a large three-storied pavilion was constructed in 1900. It included a bandstand, dance floor, cafe, and an ice cream parlor. The previous owners had started a small zoo, but Wharton expanded it.
They had a big menagerie there at that time. They had a bear pit up there with a big bear in it, you know.
One zoo that was just the smaller animals, coyote, lynx, bobcat, and all that. We had the other big zoo where they had 5 buffalo, I forget how many deer, they had a moose, and they had elk.
An aviary featuring many species of birds was added, as well as a fish hatchery that would help stock area rivers. Hothouses and an ornate East Indian-style building were built to house the herbarium. In the first 3 years of operation, the hothouses grew over 80,000 plants, used to create the unique look of the Columbia Gardens, much different than the city of Butte.
There wasn't a blade of grass in the town, only at the gardens.
In 1899, when Clark purchased the Columbia Gardens, it probably was one of the last places where you could find green grass and trees.
People needed an outlet, and the outlet became the Columbia Gardens, which was totally opposite of everything that was going on in Butte.
And it was like in dreamland. It was an area where you had all the trees and the grass and the flowers.
All the landscaping was gorgeous. They planted flower beds in the shape of, the one that I remember in particular was a big butterfly. And flowers were planted in there so that they looked like butterfly wings.
There was this huge harp, all in pansies and geraniums.
And then there was an anode, you know, the symbol of the Anaconda Company. Then there was long beds along the sides, and there were some round beds.
there would be a huge hill, and it would just be all different colors of pansies and flowers, and they were just beautiful.
And the pansies were really kind of fun. They weren't in the formal garden. They had a little area set aside, fenced in.
They'd line the kids up, there'd be 150, 200 deep, waiting for their turn to go in and pick pansies. Take flowers home to mom, you know.
It was beautiful. Wildflowers everywhere, trees everywhere, birds. We had all kinds of birds.
The aspen trees, the weeping willow trees.
And they had a tropical room, which was real neat because people in Butte didn't have a chance to see oranges on the bush very often.
Of course, in Butte, you know, you have frost, well, let's see, frost from June, July. You get frost almost every month, but at the Columbia Gardens, they would plant those for Memorial Day, and then they kept them full going until Labor Day.
And to go up there where this was a veritable garden with trees and bushes and flowers and all of the good things that a child would enjoy.
And there was a lot to enjoy.
When you come in, there was an octopus-style turnstile that you had to go through. I always remember that to get your ticket.
You would walk down this midway, I guess you'd call it, and it was a covered wooden walkway that went down kind of to the main pavilion.
And that's when you smelled those spicy hot dogs and all of that, you know, the buttery popcorn, the greasy buttery popcorn.
I remember my heart starting to beat faster as we got towards the bottom because there was this popcorn that was just incredible. It was in little brown bags, and it was always just buttery and on the outside.
Charlotte Judela remembers the popcorn too. Her grandmother, Mary Kelly, made it at the gardens for years and put Charlotte to work.
She was a very jolly woman, always had a smile on her face. The kids loved her, and they called her the popcorn lady. They were to be even, in fact, almost to count the kernels. And she used to say, now, you can't give more to some and less to others. And then she would pour the hot melted butter over the popcorn, and it was a delicacy.
But there was more than just popcorn to eat at the gardens.
Oh, there was lunch counters there, and there were stands there with hot dogs, you know, and you could get a hot dog and mustard and stuff for a nickel, you know.
Homemade taffy, oh, that was wonderful to see her pull that over, you know, and stretch it over, you know.
We would buy a bag of peanuts, actually suck all the salt off of them, put them into the Pepsi, shake it till the fizz was gone, and then that was your lunch, actually. You had peanuts, something to eat and drink at the same time.
They had turquoise-colored popsicles that were licorice. I've never seen a licorice popsicle since then, but they were turquoise-colored, but they were licorice.
You had your cotton candy and popcorn and snow cones and, you know, a lot of good stuff.
There was also a ice cream parlor that was there. You can get a nice ice cream cone. There was a gaming room operated by Frank Panisco.
Frank Panisco, a former clown with the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, spent 40 years working for the Anaconda Company. For years, Panique's Carnival Emporium was home to many of the games along the boardwalk and featured a chance to win prizes.
Oh, I had a lot of fun with the kids. They were my best customers, them kids, you know. And I had all the games for the kids. Shoe pinball and fun rack where you get 3 balls for a quarter, you knock 2 over, you get a prize.
A lot of times we try just for fun, and sometimes we knock down 1 or 2 of the bottles, plastic bottles, and they give us a balloon or something like that. But
I had a fish, and on the bottom of the fish would be a number, and we had prizes for.
You'd scoop out your little fishy and you'd pull them out and turn it over, and there'd be a number on it, and the corresponding number to the prize is whatever prize you would get.
And of course you might win a great big prize, but most of the time you just want a little something, you know.
I got to pick a prize, and this is the prize that I picked. He's stuffed with sawdust.
I've had to replace his nose. Very humble, but, you know, I mean, I've had it for 35 years.
The one I remember was the electric shocker. And you'd put the nickel or the dime in it, and there was a handle, and you would hold on to the handle, and you could turn the knob, and it would keep putting more electric shocks.
There were pinball machines then. You know, no video games, but pinball machines, and you could hear those sounds, you know, the pinging of all that.
Make a lot of noise and a lot of flashes, and that's what kids like. They hear bellowing, flashing.
Well, I'll tell you, Frank Panisco knew every kid that come up the gardens, and I bet there must have been 2,000, 3,000 kids up there, and it seemed like Panisco knew every kid up there for some reason or other, you know what I mean?
I can remember little kids, particularly little girls, running up and hugging Frank's legs and wanting to give him a kiss, and he had a wonderful way with them.
The whole community remained young at heart and enthusiastic at the gardens. Families would head there for birthday parties, holidays, and of course, family picnics.
Families used to go out there. They had a great big picnic area up behind. They'd take Sunday lunch or Sunday dinner out there, and there were fireplaces, stables, benches, all up in the picnic area, and it was a great outlet for families.
My grandmother would make me a white dress and a white hat to match, and then a red, white, and blue sash. And then off we'd go to Columbia Gardens.
A lot of people would come out there on weekends and Sunday, and they had a nice place where you could cook there.
A lot of people barbecued, so you could smell the hot dogs, the hamburgers, steaks.
My mother-in-law would bake pasties, and we would go out there, and then when her husband and my husband would get off work, why, then they come down there and have pasties.
While the adults visited at the picnic grounds, the kids invaded the playground. The most unique feature on the playground was the cowboy swings, built in Chicago but exclusive to Butte.
The cowboy swings were the only type of its kind. The Tracy Doll Company out of Chicago, Illinois was given a special order by the Anaconda Company to build these. They were so expensive to make because they were made of brass steel that they decided, no way are we ever going to try to attempt this again, because they were so expensive and so unique.
Oh man, you'd get on there with your buddy, you know, and he'd be on the other end, and you'd have this, there'd be a pulley, and you just start pulling and pushing, and then the harder and faster you go, the higher you go, and the faster you go. That was really something to get on when you were just 8, 9 years old.
The cowboy swings, I always think that the Butte kids are always tough because they could push and pull on those cowboy swings. They took a lot of energy to push and pull yourself on it.
And you just felt like a part of a huge machine. I mean, you felt part of the machinery when you were on this thing.
It was a freedom that you'd push and pull, and then you would try to crack that bar. You'd try to make it go up flat so that it'd be almost at the same level with the bar, and you'd hear that crack.
And you were probably, 20 feet high. I mean, you were really up there. So as a little kid, if you cracked the bar, I was always about crack the bars.
It would be half terror and half just sheer pleasure being on that thing, you know. You just didn't know if you were going to get off it alive.
There was other playground equipment, regular swings, box swings, monkey bars, small merry-go-rounds, and slides in all sizes.
There was one just giant slide that everybody loved. It was one of its favorite slides, but occasionally it would get quite hot. They were tin, so always you would wear like long pants up there because shorts were probably not a good thing.
And in the spring, they'd be a little hard to go down, so we'd always bring wax paper off of our bread, and they would get on and sit down and go down several times with the wax paper, and that would make it nice and slippery.
The big slide, the scary slide, that was just huge. And you'd come down so fast and you'd fall right off of it and probably skin your knees at the end, but it almost felt like it was straight up and down.
There was also an attraction called the umbrella swing.
They had this other thing was cone-shaped where you'd hold on, no rings, and then you'd tilt both ways and go around, so you could get a thrill.
and they could run with that thing and then jump up into the air, and you'd go down and you'd go up, and you were going around, you were getting sick, and your feet never ever once touched the ground. So I remember hanging onto that thing for dear life.
I remember getting blisters, horrible, horrible blisters. Everybody would come home with terrible blisters.
For those more grounded, the miniature-size house called the dollhouse also attracted many kids.
And my girlfriend and I used to play house in that, I remember, with our dolls and things like that.
I don't know what it was, but I always kind of gravitated toward that and pretended it was my own house and looked out the window and played on that little porch that it had.
But you could crawl in and out of it, play hide and go seek, or just be in it, just a special place.
At the Columbia Gardens playground, safety was always a concern. The playground was kept in order by a group of women hired by the Anaconda Company.
They tried to pretend they were strict, but they weren't. They were just a bunch of motherly ladies who were taking care of a bunch of kids that were, for the most part, not unruly.
There's a lot of no-nos. One of the big no-nos was never jumping off the equipment while it was moving. I mean, that was not to be done. The other big no-no, is do not stand behind the swings.
Zorka Milanovic worked as the playground supervisor for 13 years. She made sure all the kids were safe. Her fervent regard for safety led to her nickname.
So I was pretty strict. So when I was known as Mrs. Meanie all around the playgrounds.
I remember being terrified of Zorka Milanovic, of which I probably shouldn't have been, but she ruled the playground with an iron fist.
And I made up my mind I wouldn't tolerate with any of the kids that weren't taking orders. I got a hold of the upper hand. I didn't let loose of it. And they would say, "Here comes Mrs. Meanie."
If you were climbing on the kid's house or going too high on the any of the swings, cracking the bars, she got on you, and you were either behaved or out you went.
But some kids still tried to outsmart Mrs. Meanie. Occasionally, Milanovic had to ask a child to get off the swings because they weren't following the rules. One girl didn't appreciate it.
So she pulled a knife and put it right under my neck and says, "I'm riding on that swing." And she said to me, "And you're not putting me off." And the police took her and took the knife away from her.
Years later, the girl, now grown, returned to apologize.
So I said it paid back anyway, that she knew the right or the wrong.
For Mrs. Meanie, it was safety at the Columbia Gardens that was most important.
In all the years of work, thank God, I never had an accident. And that's where my name to this day sticks, Mrs. Meanie. I go sometime to a market down here, and the guy says to me, "Did you work out the gardens?" I said, "Are you Mrs. Meanie?" I says, "Yes, I am. You better be careful. You won't know how to handle that butcher knife."
The Columbia Gardens was a safe place parents could send their children. Parents often sent their kids alone or with friends on the trolley or the bus to spend the entire day at the gardens.
And there's this ambiance of love and caring and everybody. And I mean, there wasn't any crime.
It seemed to me that the Columbia Gardens was danger-free for a kid.
If it was excitement that you wanted, there was more than enough to go around. And one ride that epitomized the excitement of the Columbia Gardens was the roller coaster. The thrill ride with 3 levels was built in 1906. It was reduced in size to just 2 levels in 1918.
The roller coaster was a unique roller coaster, but it was actually a wooden track roller coaster. In other words, it didn't ride on rails. It simply rode on hard maple runners. And there were wheels on the bottom of the cars of the roller coaster, but they would literally bump steer around the corners as they went around.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was the only roller coaster in Montana.
Oh yeah, the roller coaster, it would be loud.
Even now I can hear the sound, the clickety-clack.
Click, 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 you know, as you went up.
And just the excitement that would build as you're going up that thing.
And then it went all the way around the corner and dropped.
And that first one, oh, that was a bad one. Boy, the stomach just went, oh.
And it dropped, oh, it must have dropped 60, 70 feet maybe.
I remember everybody would put up their hands, it seemed like put up their hands as they went, and they would scream and scream.
And then when you go around, everybody would lean this way, and everybody's hollering and screaming.
It really slapped you around. It was be classified today as a really violent ride, but it was a fun one. There were no lap bars. There was just a pipe you could hold on to.
You know, hanging onto that bar, you know, tight as I could, had the old death grip on it.
As you got older, you wouldn't even hold on to the bar because that was really kind of a pansy chicken thing to do.
When I first rode it, being with my dad, and it's scaring the heck out of me. And I remember putting my head down in his lap, and he said I bit him on the leg.
And you had to have some guts to ride it. You know, it was a little bit on the terrifying side.
I hold the record at 78 times in a row.
You were so happy and excited because everybody was screaming, and at first you didn't know why they were screaming, even though you'd been on it before, you know, but why are they screaming? And it was exciting.
There would be a lot of laughing and probably some tears and maybe a little bit of throwing up.
Sometimes you were kind of sick when you got off. I kind of remember kind of teeter-tottering around like, you know, I had to go to a different ride for a few minutes and get my balance back before I went back.
But the most excited, scared, thrilled, and sick I will ever be in my life was that first ride on the roller coaster at the Columbia Gardens.
If the excitement of the roller coaster was too much for you, there were other rides to try. After Charles Lindbergh's crossing of the Atlantic Ocean in 1927, airplanes became a big draw. So the Columbia Gardens added the giant biplanes.
These were great big old metal biplane-looking airplanes hooked on cables on a big tower that would go around and around.
I think that was about a 65-foot tower those things spun on. They got going pretty good.
It just started out slowly, and then by the time it got going, it went around and you were out quite a ways.
And a washing machine motor, you know, that didn't do anything other than to turn to prop. But you always knew you were ready to take off when they'd fire up those motors. They go, wah, you know.
And they had a big motor in the front of the planes that kind of blew your hair back and made you feel like you were in a real plane.
They'd wind her up and you'd start going out farther and farther.
Like a bird on a wing. You're free in the breeze.
And there was the front and the back seat. And of course, you always wanted the front seat because, of course, because you could pretend you were driving.
There was, I guess, a little bit of G-force there, not a lot, but it was certainly magical for a little kid.
And if you were lucky, you'd get 5 minutes. And if the kid liked you running the biplanes, you might get 7 minutes. And all you thought that was great.
And it's just a wonderful feeling, like you're flying over the carousel and all the people. Of course, you're waving to all your relatives on the ground.
But the crown jewel of the Columbia Gardens was the carousel. There were 3 different carousels through the years. The first in 1899, a second in about 1917, and the third in 1928.
They moved in a brand new Alan Herschel carousel, a Herschel Spillman, and it was a gorgeous carousel. It was a 16-segment carousel, 3 abreast, and that's the one that everyone remembers with such fondness.
There was a merry-go-round with the most beautiful horses. Oh, they were painted, you know, just better than the carnival rides you get now. They were just beautiful. It was your best thing you could possibly do is run on there, and everybody had a favorite horse. So if you could nab your favorite horse, boy, you were really in luck. My favorite horse on the carousel was the black horse with the crop mane. All of the horses on the Columbia Gardens carousel sort of had an intense facial expression. And this one was super intense.
You could climb up, you'd be kind of high. It was like sitting on a horse, and if you could engage your fantasy and your imagination.
Your feet would never hit the bottom at all, and you'd hold on to that pole and just go up and down and enjoy it so much.
We always tried to get on the outside because it was more fun going around on the outside.
I remember the mirrors, you know, in the top of the carousel. I remember some of the odd things that weren't necessarily horses. you know, like the chairs for adults, the music.
Oh yeah, it was loud. They'd be playing the good old carousel music, and it would really get you wound up.
You could hear the music from it all the time.
It felt like you were on the top of the world. If you were really small, the horses were very, very large. You had a panorama of the entire, your surrounding area. It wasn't just the carousel, it's where you were.
The skyline of rides and amusements at the Columbia Gardens changed slightly over the years. For a while, there was a Ferris wheel. A miniature train called the C&G hauled kids around the entire grounds. A building called the Katzenjammer Castle, named after the cartoon characters, opened in 1905. A piece of American history was another popular stop for both kids and adults.
We had a canyon that they used in the Civil War. Oh, wow. And all the youngsters used to come and jump on that canyon. It was built on a big platform.
If you needed to cool off on a hot summer day, there was the lake. For years, the man-made lake gave visitors a chance to wade, canoe, swim, or ride the chutes.
And every amusement park in America had to have a chute the chutes, which was a long ramp that a boat would slide down into a lake, into a man-made lake down below.
For those who wanted to just get away from everything, you could go for a stroll of the grounds, or you could hike up into the mountains.
There was a trail, a good trail.
Right against the Continental Divide, and we had trails. We'd hike up there 2 or 3 times a summer.
I'd go up further up the hill there and look around, and there were strawberries up there. And I'd pick the strawberries and eat them.
And if you needed to cool down, you could always get a drink of the cold, clean water.
Everybody'd go fill their water cans and everything. The water was supposed to be very pure up there, I remember.
And you took a break in between, you know, where you could sit around, run up and down the hills, drink water out of the fountain.
Nothing at the Columbia Gardens was expensive. Admission was always free. And once inside, a little bit of money went a long way.
Bottle of Coke, 5 cents. Bag of popcorn, maybe 10 cents at the most.
The roller coaster was 15 cents. Merry-go-round was a nickel, and the planes was a dime. And there was a lot of free rides given. When I was small, I got free rides. When I was running them, I gave plenty of free rides myself.
But I think the important thing was it was free. Then you could take maybe 25 cents or whatever it was at the time and ride one on each of the paid rides, and then enjoy the rest of the day at your leisure.
The one day when things were even cheaper was Thursday. In 1901, William Clark proclaimed Thursdays as Children's Day. The idea stuck, and for years, Thursdays were a special day for kids. Children's Day meant free transportation to the gardens, and better yet, reduced costs for rides.
When we went to the Columbia Gardens, everybody was there.
I'd say 90% of the kids at Butte went to Columbia Gardens from the time they're 6 years old on up, clear on up till their college age.
When the children would come out on Children's Day, they were allowed to go into the greenhouse, which was up on the very, very top.
My favorite memory of the gardens is really Children's Day, because everything was 5 cents, and they'd come from all over.
The Columbia Gardens, especially on Children's Day, was a great place for kids from different nationalities and different neighborhoods to meet one another and become friends.
It was a good place to mingle and get to know everybody. You know, when I was in grade school, you got to meet kids from all over the city that normally you wouldn't see.
It was just a mosaic of the whole world, I think.
One thing about the Columbia Gardens, there was no such a thing as class. By that I mean the people of the rich and the people of the poor all intermingled, and they were all the same.
Another special day for Butte and the Columbia Gardens was Miners' Union Day.
Miners' Union Day was June 13th every year. It was the biggest day at the Columbia Gardens. They would have things like miners contests. They would have various mine crews compete against each other in first aid. They had single jack and double jack drilling contest.
And all the miners would come out in their bib coveralls with a white hat and a white shirt. And their shoes, you could see yourself in them.
Huge celebrations, you know, all the miners, all the kids, picnics. Could get a little rowdy, a lot of beer, things like that.
It was without question the biggest day of the year. It was the biggest day of the year in Butte. Bigger than St. Patrick's Day ever thought of being.
Clark and Wharton built a sports complex with a large grandstand that held up to 1,600 fans for high school football and the Miners League baseball games.
Even when I was a kid, they had a big baseball stadium there, baseball bleachers and grandstand.
The Anaconda Company had a softball league that played at night, the softball, and I was one of the bat boys for one of the teams.
Celebrities such as President Theodore Roosevelt and Charles Lindbergh also made visits to the gardens. But it was the big bands performing at the pavilion's ballroom that really brought out the people. The giant 3-story pavilion at the Columbia Gardens hosted many famous musical acts. Beneath giant, billowing flags, visitors enjoyed the music of Meaderville's Boston and Montana Band, a popular act at the time.
We had one of the leading bands in the United States, Sam Treloar's band, that used to give free band concerts at Columbia Gardens. That was always a big draw.
On sunny days, the Boston and Montana Band entertained listeners on the outdoor bandstand. Other bands played inside the pavilion where almost 2,000 dancers took to the floor on Sunday afternoons. The pavilion could also house a banquet for up to 400 people. The original pavilion burned down in 1907. Clark replaced it over the next 2 years with another remarkable building. Included was a 1-inch thick maple floor that filled the over 15,000 square feet of space. Space that just seemed to be made for dancing.
Probably the best dance floor in the whole Northwest.
Boy, I mean, do you know how big the place is? It was huge. It was just a huge place. And it would be full of people.
It looked like just a ballroom out of some castle arrangement. Everybody was all dressed up, and it was quite a grandiose occasion.
Most of the men were suited with shirts and ties. The women wore a variety of things. They were all usually in dresses, some of which were short dresses. They were mostly dressed up, as they used to say.
They were big bands, and they played this wonderful, what I remember as swing music.
Benny Goodman, Harry James, Dorsey, the Ink Spots had come.
Jimmy Dorsey and Tommy Dorsey and Blue Baron. Oh, gee, there were some great bands came through. Les Brown, Stumpy Brown.
They played jazz, they played waltzes, they played two-steps.
I was there at the time that jitterbugging just came in. And boy, I tell you, we had a lot of fun down there.
But when you got about between 700 and 1,000 people on the dance floor, it really was swing and sway with Sammy Kaye, because the floor would sway. And it was the most interesting feeling you ever had.
Most of the time you had one or two, you know, and you really didn't know for sure.
I've heard many of the old-timers say that you never got tired dancing on the Columbia Gardens Pavilion dance floor.
You'd fill out your reservations for dances. You'd meet people as you go in, and you're my next dance, you're my next, and so on. You'd fill out their names, and then you'd have to look for them between dances.
One of the regulars to play the Columbia Gardens was Antonioli's Copper Kings.
My father had run the Winter Garden Ballroom in Butte, and his orchestra played the Winter Garden in the wintertime, and in the summertime they played the gardens.
And then the 11 Copper Kings were the favorite up there, and you can't believe the music they made. The people would clap and holler and stamp for them, you know.
And we could dance about 3,000 people at one time on that. It was huge. At 10 cents a dance.
The song request became routine for the orchestra.
all the names became numbers, you know. Somebody requests something, it's 27 in the book and so forth. So, but a lot of the tunes that you have a request for today are ones we played 50 years ago.
The Columbia Gardens Pavilion was special for many teenagers as well. Butte High, Butte Central, and the School of Mines all celebrated their proms or formals at the ballroom.
It was decorated up. We'd go up there and decorate.
It was just absolutely gorgeous. It had lights all over. It was huge.
You know, we'd have the whole high school there dancing, and it would be in about 1/3 of the dance floor.
Well, we always left 2 dances free in the middle of it. And then you'd take your girlfriend and run up the boardwalk and go up and take a ride on the roller coaster.
One group of youngsters' roller coaster car got stalled, and the girls having to climb down that lattice work with their high heels and formals on.
You couldn't help dance. And like I said, we had our junior prom there in '31, and that was a glorious time.
The final prom at the Gardens was held in 1974. Meg Seck was there.
It was just a really special place, and some just really special memories of being able to see that, but then also knowing that it would never ever be there again, and that was pretty sad.
And half of Butte was out there, and I think there was a lot of wet eyes. Everybody was crying. It was the last prom.
You just felt like a princess up there because you always had a new formal. Most of the time you was your favorite guy. Maybe you weren't, but you went anyway. You just felt like a magical person. You felt like Cinderella at the ball.
For many, fairy tale romances blossomed during events at the Columbia Gardens.
The first date I ever had with my wife, I took her to a dance at the Columbia Gardens. The rest is history. We've been married now for 41 years, all thanks to the dance at the Columbia Gardens Dance Hall.
I don't think I was interested in the bands. I think I was just interested in dancing with Muriel.
We'd go out there with our dates sometimes and ride on the merry-go-round and act silly, you know.
I remember having a boyfriend who carved our names in the tree, a quaking aspen tree up by the kitchen. Often wondered what happened to that tree if it went in the pit. Probably did, just like our romance.
While some folks were playing, others were working. A job at the Columbia Gardens was considered quite a plum.
See, I was the most popular kid in Butte High School. I think I had every girl knew me by first name, everybody, because all my friends got free rides on the roller coaster.
Jerry Butte not only lived at the Columbia Gardens, but also worked there.
I worked there my high school years, and then I went to Carroll College. I worked the summers of those years, and then later on, I worked there also then on the regular gang. Worked right up till '73. I still see people come up to me and, I remember you gave me free rides on the roller coaster, you know.
Shirley Burchell worked at the soda fountain while in high school.
All the kids were jealous, but I could make a mean milkshake, I'll tell you.
Although the Columbia Gardens was normally open from Memorial Day to Labor Day, that didn't stop some Butte residents from having fun when the snow flew.
So we would gather up our Coleman stove. We had a little 3-burner Coleman and a big pot of chili. And to make, we had hot chocolate. We had a 6-foot big 10-inch high flexi flyer. And it was always kept well polished and ready to go.
They'd start all the way up at the top by the greenhouse and go all the way down past the pavilion. You know, it was quite a ride.
The only trouble is we had to walk back up the hill.
Amid all of the fun, work continued throughout the winter. Before each season, the place would be cleaned and painted, especially the carousel horses.
Every year they would paint the horses. And what great pride. I mean, you know, painters are painters. But up there when you worked for the Columbia Gardens, you painted those horses, he was so proud, just so tickled to be a painter on those.
Then we started the greenhouse up like in February. Started planting new flowers all again, you know. There was always something to do out there.
The Columbia Gardens was the place to be in Butte, and the city had William Clark to thank. Clark was finally elected to the United States Senate in 1901. Following his term as Montana's senator, Clark started to sell off his mine holdings and moved to New York City. On March 2, 1925, William Andrews Clark died.
Clark did a lot of wonderful things at that Columbia Gardens. And I, for one, and I think anybody who visited the Columbia Gardens appreciates what William Clark did.
You know, in Butte, we all love him because we all got a free day. All of, for every summer of our lives, we got the free day at the gardens.
But Clark's intentions would be questioned to the very end.
Clark's legacy is the Columbia Gardens. He was also very greedy. There's no question about that. Clark was in it for Clark.
Clark's will would be a point of contention among citizens for years. It was rumored that his will had deeded the Columbia Gardens over to the city of Butte.
That's absolutely not true. Clark did not give the city of Butte the Columbia Gardens. It is not in his will. The will is 23 pages long with 28 clauses in it. There is nothing at all in that will giving anything to the city of Butte.
When W.A. Clark died, the Anaconda Copper Mining Company purchased most of his holdings.
The Anaconda Company did a lot of very good things when they took over the facility.
In 1927, they did another good thing. They hired a man named Ted Beach. Beach started out by feeding the animals at the zoo. When the zoo closed in the 30s, he was told to clean things out.
And they wanted me to shoot the little bear, you know, and I raised him. I opened the gate and let him go, and he went up over the mountain.
Later, Beach worked with the grounds crew, creating the unique floral designs, and eventually he became the park superintendent for the final 25 years of the Columbia Gardens.
With a snap brim hat, a leather jacket, and a leather bow tie and gray shirt.
He was the Columbia Gardens. You know, he was the boss out there.
My uncle worked right next to everybody. I mean, if they were potting pansies, he was right in there doing it.
The Gardens was like his little baby, and he made sure that his baby was well groomed every day.
He was just a fantastic, easy-going guy. Loved kids.
Just planting gardens and planting carnations and roses and
After Clark's death and the sale of his Butte assets to the Anaconda Company, the Columbia Gardens continued operations. Eventually, buses replaced the trolleys. Some rides were changed and playground equipment updated. And the people of Butte continued to come and enjoy the park. But as Butte entered the 1960s and 70s, it became easier for people to go other places outside of the mining city. As the Columbia Gardens slowly lost more visitors, the Anaconda Company lost more money. Revenues remained stable, but expenses were growing each year. The company was also losing money due to labor and international problems. The company decided it was time to expand mining in Butte. They announced plans to create the Continental Pit and mine near and eventually under the Columbia Gardens.
The Anaconda Company did not run it as a business. They operated the facility more as a tax write-off. And because of that fact, you know, you're paying a dime or a nickel, they're not going to make any money.
It meant so many people's jobs, so many families' livelihood that this mining development take place.
So on February 22nd, 1973, the Anaconda Company announced the gardens would close following a scaled-back season.
We were shocked, upset, saddened, and absolutely lots of wringing of the hands. What can we do? What can we do? How can we do it? How can we save it?
I think I still remember exactly what my dad said. He said, you know, William Clark built the Columbia Gardens for the people of Butte, and now the company's shutting it down, and that's wrong.
I think I've got more gold in my mouth from my dentist than they got out of the hills out there of the Columbia Gardens.
I kept saying, no, you can't do that. You know, this is Butte. This is what Butte is the Columbia Gardens.
I think people my age have trouble talking about the closing of the Columbia Gardens without crying.
In the fall of 1973, tears would flow during the final Children's Day, a final Thursday for Butte's kids to say goodbye. And the adults had their final chance to dance in the pavilion's ballroom on September 3rd.
This is the last dance, you know what I mean? And I don't think anybody in there missed the dance. It was terrible, I'm telling you. Everybody felt bad. Everybody felt bad. It was too bad. I even feel bad thinking of it. It was such a great place.
While there were efforts to move the Columbia Gardens to other areas around Butte, no one could anticipate what happened on the night of November 12th, 1973.
But that night, I know there was a football game on. We heard the alarm and everything, and then we noticed the smoke. And I went down there. I was one of the first people down there besides the fire truck.
It was a fire. The arcade building and the boardwalk area of the Columbia Gardens were burning.
She started all down in the candy stand. I wasn't really too much concerned about it.
It was the off-season at the Gardens, and that meant most of the rides and attractions were stored in the arcade building.
One of the little neighbor kids come up and he says to me, let's get the merry-go-round horses, let's get them out. And I said, hell, the fire will never go that far.
My dad and my uncle wanted to go in to see if they could get a couple of the horses out, and they wouldn't let them near it.
Ted Beach came down and he opened that door that went into the ice cream parlor where the horses were stored. And it seemed like when he opened that door, it was like a draft. That fire just went right up and through. And that was the end of the horses and everything.
Everything went. You wouldn't believe it till you seen it. Everything was gone.
It was just devastating for them that they couldn't even, get anything out.
The fire was the death blow to the Columbia Gardens. The cause of the blaze was attributed to a faulty electrical transformer, but not everyone believes that story.
There was no electricity going into that facility that night. Therefore, as said in the paper that it was an electrical short, that's nonsense. It wasn't an electrical short. It was an arson set by the Anaconda Company. It is a pattern the company used for years.
My uncle was really, really shook up. Until the day he died, he contended that it was actually wiring that caused the fire. It was really devastating for him. That was his life.
Everybody woke up in the morning and it was just a shock. The carousel had burned. It was like a death.
Sick. It was a sick feeling. Being around it all them years that I was around it. I knew that was going to be the end of it.
So Columbia Gardens, to those of us who had been there and who lived in that era, you'll always talk of it with a smile and with a deal of bitterness because it was taken away. Not maliciously, but it was taken away.
The ghosts of the Columbia Gardens still haunt the Butte area. The Columbia Gardens area is now almost completely covered up by the progress of mining. The final remnant of the gardens, the water tower, was moved off the hill and placed near the old Belmont mine. The playground equipment that was stored away from the fire is now being used and enjoyed by another generation of children at Clark's Park in Butte. The arch of the Columbia Gardens Pavilion still makes an imposing statement on the hilly landscape southwest of Butte at the former Beef Trail ski area. Near it are two of the roller coaster cars that for years thrilled its passengers. But the true romance of the Columbia Gardens is the number of people who were touched by the place. The people who rode the trolley, the kids who cracked the bar on the cowboy swings, the couples who danced their way around the ballroom, and the families out for Sunday picnics.
For someone who didn't know the gardens, you can't really describe to them what it meant to someone like me, someone who grew up in Butte. It was just a complete departure from your regular everyday life. It was a chance just to be taken somewhere, you know, much more beautiful and much more fun and exciting.
I don't remember a cloudy day up there. I'm sure there were, you know, but in your own memory, the beauty of the place just made everything feel a little better to you.
No, it was just a place that was sort of had a magic to it.
I think everything related with the Columbia Gardens, I think a lot of it is the romance of of being with your family.
There's things in your childhood that were indigenous to your childhood, that were precious to you. You can't relive them. Once they're gone, they're gone. They're gone forever.
It was just the happiest day of our life when we got up there, especially when we were real small.
I thought it would never stop. I thought it would be on forever and ever and ever.
We felt it was handed down from our mother and father to us, and we handed it down to our kids. And unfortunately, our kids, it wasn't there for their kids.
I saw people having fun, laughing with each other, talking. I believe that Columbia Gardens was a spiritual experience.
The loss of the Columbia Gardens was a tragedy with no benefit, and I think is really one of the great tragedies of Butte, and certainly was, quite frankly, one of the personal tragedies of my life.
You will never get another place where you'll have that many generations in my lifetime. I mean, you know, you build it today, it's going to take, you know, another 100 years for it to be a romantic place with enough memories to keep it alive.
You didn't go there and have a bad time. It was just a wonderful place to make wonderful memories, and it's like going to Disneyland, only maybe lots better, because it was in Butte.
Wish we could go dancing in the gardens one more time. Come out tonight, Millie, we'll go dancing. What a night it would be for romancing. All through the gardens and out o'er the hills, how I wish we could be there still. Come out tonight, Millie, we'll go dancing. What a night it would be for romancing. All through the gardens and out o'er the hills, how I wish we could be there still. How I wish we could be there still.
Remembering the Columbia Gardens was made possible with production support from the Montana Cultural Trust, the Greater Montana Foundation, the University of Montana, and viewers like you who are friends of Montana PBS.